It's no secret that James Bond is an accumulation of men current times. Each actor emphasized the style, personality, and ethics of a man and how he acted during their time in the role. The Bond fandom has been dying to see who will fill in these shoes and how they will do it in today's brave new world. As a 28-year-old lifelong Bond fan, with a 26-year-old Bond on the horizon, here is what I want to see from a modern-day Bond.
Bond, I need you back.
I never left.
Guns, fast cars, and bitches.
Just kidding. Well, am I? No, of course I'm kidding. I want more than that. Of course. But this is a very exciting time, and this is why I wanted to make this video, because for the first time, I'm going to be older than the Bond that gets cast. I'm also not going to be incredibly young when they get cast either, like Brosnan or Craig. This is in a weird way because I partially fell into the beginning of Daniel Craig's era, but also being very young. But this is going to be the first Bond that is my... No, it's not my Bond, but it feels like I'm finally in that mature group of a Bond casting. But with that, being at my age, everything going on in the world right now, or how they look at men, masculinity, or Bond as a character, the very anti-hero, the non-perfect character of James Bond that we all love, here's what I want to see from him. Here's how I want him to act, how I want him to speak, look, how he fights. This is kind of my idea of a modern-day Bond for a modern-day audience. Now, it's no secret, and I think a lot of the Bond community could agree, that Bond hasn't quite made it into the younger generation yet. Sure, some of them might know who James Bond is, but, and it hurts me to say this too, as being part of that somewhat younger generation, some people you bring up James Bond and they don't know who he is, or they can't really picture him in their mind. You know, maybe they know the name, but they don't know the face, they don't know the character, they don't know the legacy. And I am dying, and I think most of the fandom is as well, for Bond to finally get that connection with the younger generation. You know, for them to finally experience how awesome that character is, because they have the responsibility of carrying on that character and its legacy. You know, Bond was here before me, and he's going to be here well after, you know, any of us. That character is going to be there forever, and he's going to basically be a testament of the time. He's a character that is always built off of being a modern day kind of perception or time capsule, if you go watch the old ones, of how the world was and how men acted, how they, you know, think, how they conversed with women, how they dressed, everything. And so right now is a very important beginning stepping stone for a Bond, particularly this one in First Light, or who they end up casting in a future film, how they're going to do that. How are they going to resonate with a modern audience? Now, I want to clarify. Saying I'm a lifelong Bond fan at 28 can raise some eyebrows. If you do the math and track it back to where Bond was at the time I may have been born at 28, you can kind of get an idea that maybe I'm not very experienced, or maybe I don't know quite enough to speak upon this subject and the future of Bond, and might be right, but I'm still going to try anyways, and I'm going to clarify. The very first Bond film that ever came out that I saw in theaters was Casino Royale, but it was not the first Bond film I had ever seen. Fortunately, growing up, I grew up in a family that was very cultured and emphasized very much that we watch films that were before our time, or we experienced things that weren't just built for our age at the time. I grew up, some of my fondest early memories was playing James Bond video games and watching the early films. By the time I was ready to go see Casino Royale in theaters, I knew who Sean Connery was. I knew who Roger Moore was, Dalton, Lazenby, all of them. I had seen so many Bond films and played all the video games that from the earliest I can remember until now, I have been a Bond fan. And I will say, even though Casino Royale was the film that released my first theater experience, Pierce Brosnan was still my Bond. I grew up, even though I was a little bit younger, with that video game generation of Pierce Brosnan, with Agent Under Fire, Everything or Nothing. Oh, God, that one's good. Nightfire, all of those. And I very vividly remember the most heartbreaking day of my life. Walking up after Die Another Day had released, which, I'll be honest, Die Another Day is another topic, but I'll say for a young kid, Die Another Day was the coolest film on the planet. 5, 6, 7 years old. That film was a 10 out of 10 Oscar-winning film at that time. Now it's a different question, but, let's get it back on subject. I remember walking up and my mother was reading People magazine, and there was a shot of the cover of Pierce Brosnan. Shirtless, didn't look too in Bond shape at the time, but the headline read, they told me I was too fat to play James Bond. And that's how I found out that the Bond I grew up with was no longer Bond. So you can imagine me as I was going to go see my first Bond theater experience with Casino Royale. I don't even know if I knew who the guy's name was. If his name Daniel Craig, I can't remember that. But what I do remember is sitting in the back of my friend's, parents' car as we were driving. So, I wasn't old enough to go drive. Sitting there saying, I can't believe Pierce Brosnan, and they did that to him and got rid of him, and this isn't going to be as good. And we all know how that turned out, right? One of the most awesome, profound, and vivid memories of growing up as a kid in a theater for me was having that negative attitude to Casino Royale for no reason, no justification. But watching that opening sequence, the black and white talking of Bond getting his 00 status, at that time I was probably wondering, my God, is this whole film going to be black and white? But that shot of Craig picking up the pistol, turning around, that gun barrel sequence, which was my first gun barrel experience ever for a Bond film in a theater, and Chris Cornell's theme playing, I remember thinking, oh my God, we are in for a treat, and this is one of the best moments of my life. But unfortunately, that's past. I did grow up with Daniel Craig now. He's my personal favorite, but they were also kind of a little bit before my time, or I wasn't of that same age factor. Bond has always been older than me by quite a lot. This is the first defining, kind of Bond experience in my life where I am going to be of similar age, or maybe a little bit younger, depending on, this new video game coming out. So I think with that, and where the generation is with Bond, this younger generation, I think I felt the need, the compelled, if you will, to write down and express what I think Bond should be in this modern world, in this modern day, and what he shouldn't be. Now, it pains me to say this, but I have to be honest. And I think if the Bond fandom was honest, they would agree in saying that Bond hasn't quite appealed to the younger generation yet. I have many instances of people I know, both my age or younger, who have never seen a Bond film before. Some, as shocking as it even sounds, don't even know who he is, or might recognize the name but can't put that name to an actor's face or a film. For whatever reason, how Bond has been marketed and made for the last couple films, as successful as it's still been, has a brand new audience and generation it needs to reach out to, which is very important because that audience is what's going to carry on this character and its legacy. We want it to be successful so it keeps going, so films keep getting made, and video games and every other piece of sartorial items. We need that younger generation to become interested in Bond for the character, for its legacy, for it to be able to thrive. And what I did, and I couldn't believe how hard this actually was, I wrote down my top things of what I want to see, not see, change, and not change for a modern day Bond. Now, this could be the Bond in 007 First Light, or the actor they potentially choose. Henry Cavill, what? But anyway, these are my top listed items I wrote, which I found to be a lot more difficult than I would have thought. You know, everyone has their ideal version of James Bond in their head, or what he looks like, how he acts, and, you know, we can think about it in our mind, but trying to put it into words was kind of harder than I realized, you know. But I wrote a list of what I thought was the most important. 1 through 7, not by coincidence, but it landed on 7, thank you very much. So let's get into it with number 1.
Style. To some Bond fans, the most important aspect. And for most Bond fans, their favorite. Now, I mentioned earlier how Bond is a reflection of style in the time the film was made, and this is exactly why I believe this point is worthy of the top 7 in my list. I'll be the first to admit, my generation's style isn't good. It relies too much on overtly baggy clothing with flashy logos and lacks the aspect of what I believe a modern-day Bond should and can showcase. This Bond has the opportunity to show a younger generation that what you wear and how it fits can tell a person things about yourself that words never could. And I believe the younger generation being exposed to a Bond their age who has a sense of pride, a purpose when he dresses, with well-fitted clothing that represents himself in a respectable manner, can give them an idea that you can look professional and badass at the same time. And that there's a reason why classics never go out of style, while that oversized band t-shirt will fade away. I believe this is an aspect of Bond that doesn't need to change but stay the same. Bond has always been an incredible dresser, and it's important to showcase that to a young...
Things I want to see, point 2. A flawed man. Now, this could be the most controversial topic of Bond currently, and it could be the most defining factor for this new Bond, depending on the direction they take for the character, and whether they decide to keep it the same, change it, or implement both.
Present-day media in both films and TV shows very rarely showcase a male figure that is both a good man and a flawed man. The topic of changing Bond as a character to address some of his more flawed characteristics has been discussed quite seriously for some time now, with some wanting to erase the aspects of Bond that they don't believe is acceptable for a modern man and audience, and then others, a vast majority, believing these shouldn't be changed, as they were defining characteristics for Bond. And I'm here to argue, not only are they unique in defining characteristics for Bond, but they may be the most important to showcase to a younger generation. A generalized definition of Bond is often somewhat in the form of a womanizing spy who saves the world from global and sometimes political threats. But where the real Bond lies is within these improper generalized statements from people who would have the Bond brand changed and his characteristics changed to what they believe is a better and more safer viewing experience for audiences. It's okay to see the hero of our films fail. It's okay to see him make mistakes, along with see them do things we personally wouldn't want to do in our own life. See, Bond isn't a hero, but an anti-hero. He's the ultimate male fantasy, but also the ultimate male fantasy of things gone to extreme. He's the ultimate male template. You can take what you want from him, you can learn what you want from him, and you can get rid of things you don't believe you want from him as well. We see Bond as a womanizer, a drunk, and someone who often chooses his own personal gain over care for others. But in the end, despite all of his flaws, no one cares more for his fellow man and country like James Bond. And when it's time to roll up the sleeves to do what's right, he'll fight to his last breath so that the job gets done. The younger generation seeing a Bond who often seems perfect on the outside, but on the inside has personal issues, mental issues, and psychological issues can help a younger man realize that it's okay to be flawed, because everyone is. They can learn to emulate the best aspects of Bond and also learn not to repeat or pursue the worst aspects of Bond. Point 3, modern masculinity. Every man grows up with a role model, whether it's someone close to him in real life or it's fictionalized from an actor of the character they play, or sometimes it's both. Men love to envision themselves as the masculine heroes in the films they watch. When a man sees an actor in great shape, such as the classic action heroes of Stallone and Schwarzenegger, they get motivated to train to have the same physicality. When a man watches how a hero of a story fights against all odds to achieve his dreams and goals, it inspires him to chase his own dreams. Now, I think a lot of men can agree what kind of male heroes a man is exposed to can have a powerful impact on them and their ideal version for themselves and their goals, particularly their goals of who they want to be growing up. A Bond, particularly a younger Bond, I believe has the power to influence these younger generations and showcase a level of masculinity that is sometimes lost in my generation. The thought of a male doing a job solely because it's the right thing to do. He doesn't quit when it's tough. He doesn't complain, nor does he put the blame on others for his own life. He's proud of who he is, and he's definitive in his life and goals. Now let's be honest, an immature, low-focus man could never stop a Bond-level threat, nor would a man want to imitate that man. This is why it's so important, I believe it's so important for this Bond to put a new level of focus on etiquette, chivalry, knowing when to open the door, knowing when to tip your driver, and how to get the job done. I personally want to see what I'm calling a modern take on vintage masculinity, where we see the classics of manners, morals, and stoicism of a classic man return and show that it's okay to be confident and proud of who you are, and that those men can lead by example. Bond can lead by example. He can be that ideal hero that shows a younger generation kid how to treat a lady, how to open a door, how to tip your driver, how to pull open a chair, how to have confidence walking into a room, how to dress. That's all there for a younger generation of Bond to teach a younger generation of men, and this is a primetime opportunity for them to really knock that out of the park.
Point 4, action scenes. Now, I would never minimalize Bond and its legacy and the character to just mindless action. That's a huge disservice to the film, to the character, and its legacy. But I will say, as far as action goes, when you have films like John Wick, Extraction, Mission Impossible, just setting the highest gold standard for fight scenes and action spectacle and set pieces, personally, I don't think Bond has quite hit that. It hasn't hit that mark. Now, there has been instances, where you get the brutality of a John Wick from Daniel Craig, or the set pieces such as the opening to Casino Royale and the construction zone, but they just haven't quite matched that yet. No. Again, I never want anyone to think Bond is just a mindless action film. No, I think the best action pieces and action scenes both convey that aspect of brutality, I'm not cutting that out, brutality that we know and love and want to see in an action scene of the guy kicking ass, but also there's a sense of story in it, right? When I say mindless, I don't want to just see action for action, right? I think the best is when the story sets up that there's a reason, there's a what and a why of that fight scene. If it's to, fight off the main, antagonist, if it's to save someone, or if it's to kind of push the plot forward, those are the best action pieces. Now, I think Bond just needs to find a way to incorporate, the hand-to-hand combat and actions and spectacles of Mission Impossible and the brutality of John Wick or Extraction. Now, as I mentioned, we do see a glimmer of it. Daniel Craig, everyone loves, which is weird because it's not a very long fight scene, but everyone loves that brutal fight scene in Quantum of Solace where he stabs the guy, lets him bleed out. Everybody loves it. And I know there's some controversy for this scene, but the No Time to Die final staircase scene, that is probably the closest I'd say we've gotten. Now, I know some people have referred to it as a little bit of video gamey. Some people think it's a little unrealistic, which is fair. But I also think that was done for a particular reason. See, we all know Daniel Craig Bond is the badass Bond. And if we think about it, I'm not counting the final little interaction with Safin, that was his last fight scene. And I think their goal for that fight scene was finally like, hey, I am the badass Bond. Now I'm going to show you just how powerful and badass I really am. Now, let's just take that same attitude and move it to the other guy, whoever he is. Henry Cavill, what? Number 6. Now, this might be my more lighthearted request compared to my previous 5 that I'll delve deep into the deep psychology of a man, masculinity, and what that means for a future generation of young men watching Bond. Now, this one, I don't believe it'll be as controversial. Actually, I think most of the Bond fandom, well, at least from what I've seen, I could be wrong, most of the Bond fandom, both young, new, and older generations can agree on this one, particularly, well, if you don't, let me know. But this one is the car. Now, the original Aston Martin, that is James Bond's car. I'm not denying that. No one should deny it. You never could deny it. That particular model is part of James Bond. That is part of his legacy. And I don't think anyone will ever try to challenge that, question it, or whatnot. But at the same time, I'm kind of tired of it. You know, I know it's great nostalgia. It's part of the character, but particularly talking about how, you know, the Bond I grew up with in the Brosnan era, the video games and those films, part of me growing up and believing one traditional thing with Bond was that he always got a new car. That was part of the new film. You know, there's new gadgets, new guns, new girls, new villain, and new car. And I miss that. I really do miss that. I think that was really exciting for him to always it was always a cool way to introduce a new Aston Martin, you know. Heck, even how they did it in No Time to Die, excuse me, with an older Aston Martin, but was kind of new to that film and hadn't been in for so long. I really miss that. I like it. I think that's kind of part of the excitement and fun, because we all kind of try to live vicariously through him in a lot of ways, is that when he's out on a mission and he's got his briefing and he's got his gadgets and he's ready to go, I think being able to see that beautiful, souped up new Aston Martin that they created for the film is just part of that experience that I really miss, you know. And I mean, no one's denying Aston Martin makes, you know, I would say the most beautiful looking modern day sports cars on the planet. I'm not biased, of course, by any means, being a Bond fan, but let's bring that back. Let's see, you know, they did it in Casino Royale and a little bit of Spectre, but then Craig really kind of fell back into the older model of Aston Martin. I just personally think it's had its time for a little while. I'm not saying let's forego it forever, but just for right now, to kind of bring in some new fresh air and, you know, bringing in this new blood of new kiddos and Rugrats into the world of James Bond, let's bring in some new cars. Let's keep that going. Let's keep it fresh. Let's keep it exciting. I mean, come on. And gadgets in the car, truth be told, I'm fine with them. I'm fine without them. And we made it. Final topic. Thank you to everyone who's made it this far. If you've stuck around, I really appreciate it. I know it's a lot. And this is my first video, so hopefully it's going okay. But number 7, number 007. This is another lighthearted one, I'd say, with number 6, but I think it's an important request. And now I'll usually say when it comes to movies, I like them dark. I like them dark, depressing, usually very serious, about as minimal of comedy as possible, you know, depending on the film, of course, but I'm not against all of that, but normally I like more of a serious, you know, approach. And we definitely got that with Daniel Craig's, except for, you know, some bits and pieces here. But, you know, me, myself, I don't like my movies unless the main character is on the verge of moral bankruptcy. But, here's one thing I want. This is one of the big ones I want. One of my final requests is I want to be happy at the end of the movie. I want to, you know, be excited for the future of Bond and feel like, you know, I helped save the day with James Bond, right? Because as we all know, No Time to Die, and some people really liked the ending, some people didn't. I teeter somewhere in the middle. Because I like a good heroic sacrifice. I just don't know if it felt very earned, in my opinion. But, you know, I will say it was kind of depressing. And I watched No Time to Die a couple times every year, just hoping that one final time I watch it, I'll finally really love it. You know, I'm going to watch it until I like it. But it's just once it hits the end where you think he saved the day, and then that quick turn of events where he becomes poisoned, and then everything throughout there is just really, really depressing. And to me, I feel like it didn't leave a legacy for those films in a very, you know, triumphant, happy type of mood. And it kind of sounds like that's not what they were going for, but still, it just, in a way, I think most people would agree, they probably would have preferred some other different direction for it. So with this, you know, I'm fine with Bond getting beat up. I'm fine with him not always winning. I'm fine with, you know, if you're going to make a couple, maybe he doesn't win every time. You know, eventually he does in the sequel. But I just don't want to walk out of the movie theater feeling like, you know, I just had my heart ripped out of my chest. I still want to feel like, a great example of that is Casino Royale or Quantum or even Skyfall, you know, the ending of Quantum where they say, Bond, I need you back. And he says, I never left. It's not like that was him saving the planet, getting the girl and, riding away on a rafter to, a happy ending. But it still is like, that was a badass line. And hey, Bond's back. And just like Skyfall when they ask him if he's ready to get back to work. So it doesn't have to be over the top. I'm okay if it is, but let's just kind of, bring the more excitement. We should have the feeling that when we're leaving that theater at the end of a Bond film, we can sit outside of the theater room, outside of the door in the main lobby, and just talk for hours about what we think is going to happen next, or what we liked and how we feel and how, oh man, Bond's gonna get him. Just like at the end of Casino Royale, I remember most of my friends, as I was leaving and we all just witnessed the greatest movie of all time, we were all sitting there thinking, oh man, Mr. White's dead, Mr. White's screwed, right? Because he gets him right at the end, he says the line, and you're just like, wow, isn't that weird how, for me personally, towards the end of that, you almost forget he doesn't say the famous tagline until the end, and then you're like, oh my god, this is perfect. Whoever thought of this at the end was a mastermind. I want that same feeling back. I want it. I want to enjoy and be excited for the sequel. So let's bring a little bit of excitement back to it as far as happiness, excitement, hand in hand, right? But thank you everyone for going through these top 7 lists with me of things I want. Now, some of these I will say too, who knows if the farther we get down the line of a film and closer to the video game, some of them might change, A lot of these I kind of sat down and thought of, on the spot. So it's what's going through currently here, but times change, people change, maybe I'll make another one of these eventually. But thank you everyone for watching, and see you on the next video. Take care.